And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 140th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 532nd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, September 26th, 2019. I am your host tonight, Brian Tonsoni, a.k.a. The Coach. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call. And that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moments.
And Indiana is the national champion. When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes a shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Tuesday when the 2019-2020 Indiana Hoosiers were made available to answer questions on Media Day. We heard Trace Jackson Davis talk about concentrating on team chemistry, Devontae Green willing to take on the responsibility of scoring for the team, and also heard about more movement away from the ball on offense. Robert Finnessy discussed having a more aggressive mindset. Plus, you have to love Joey Brunk and his leadership saying, quote, "I am comfortable with who I am and don't have any problem talking and speaking," unquote. Those takeaways, plus a few more, were key parts of Media Day. However, one moment and one player really stood out. This week's banner moment is all about Jerome Hunter. The team released a statement saying that Jerome is totally cleared for all basketball activities and that due to HIPAA laws, they could not reveal any more information. Other than that, the injury will be watched and monitored going forward. Recently, a physical therapist had messaged me with his thoughts on Jerome. He believed, from looking at things from the outside and no direct observation, that Jerome could play, but may have some minutes restricted as the team monitors his recovery. He explained what he thought was wrong with Jerome and stated that it should not affect his ability to play the game of basketball, and the Media Day information confirmed this belief. This is great news. First, for the young man himself. Sitting out for a year is tough in any set of circumstances, but when an injury with great complications is the cause, doubt may have creeped in about his future. Jerome even stated, quote, "Last year really hurt," unquote. The news is also great for the Indiana basketball program. Jerome is a versatile player who can score the basketball and defend several positions. He will need some time to get back up to speed on the court, but Jerome's positive attitude and love for the game will allow him to be a huge part of this team. Jerome commented saying, quote, "As you keep getting through it, you start thinking of other things and how you can get better off the court. That's all I focused on, how next year I could be the best player I could be," unquote. Well, it looks like next year is here for Jerome Hunter. Welcome back, Jerome. We are all excited to see you on the court. More importantly, we are glad you are recovering and can pursue your dream. And welcome back to all the Hoosier players. It's time to go to work. Okay, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show, which in rare occurrence does not include Jared, Andy, or Ryan. Instead, we have two special guests who you will be very familiar with. First to my left, he is Hoosier Nation's most anonymous yet popular superfan. He is Zach Osterman's co-host on Mind Your Banners, and he is the president emeritus of the T-John Job Fan Club.
I've got photos of T-John with an elephant now.
Chronic, what are your IU basketball thoughts as the offseason speeds ever closer to Hoosier hysteria?
Well, first, let me state the record. Zach is I co-host. Zach he's a host too. I don't like him taking top billing regardless. Nevertheless, he's the one that actually shows up on time, so I guess we'll let him have it. To the question though, I'm excited as you can expect to be, seeing where the Hoosiers have come, where we expect them to be going forward in year 3 of Archie's tenure here. I think it's a lot of opportunity. It's one of those high risk, high reward seasons where I think there's a lot on the table for the program and for the players themselves individually. There's a whole lot of opportunity, I think, for guys to really stake a claim as important, meaningful, and hopefully transitional Indiana basketball players that kind of get the program back to where the fan base would like to see it be at this point.
And to my right, he is the godfather of IU Sports Podcasting, the head of IU Sports Media Department, and the man who completed his dissertation by power ranking Bloomington pizza options. Yes, it is the Sultan of the subtweet himself, Galen Clavio. Galen, what's on your mind this evening?
That's a tremendous intro. I need to send Jared some extra money in this week's royalty check. No, you know what? I'm just excited that we have storylines. We have something new to talk about with IU basketball. I was thinking about this with IU football in August. I was just so excited that practice was back and that we could have something to focus on, and something that once games got going, we could really, get a sense of how the team was. And I think with basketball, we need it even more so, because frankly, even though last year's regular season ended fairly well, I think the overall ending of the season wasn't what anybody wanted, and we've just had a bunch of time to sit around and stew in those juices. And so the fact that Hoosier Hysteria is this early, the fact we've already heard from the players and from Coach Miller from Media Day, I think it's great. And the nice thing is, it's a nice kind of slow on-ramp to the season. We had an exhibition game, but, that's, I think, a month from tonight. And then we get some games right after that. So it should be a really fun next month here, I think.
Well, thank you guys for joining me as a host. Without any of the three regulars, I couldn't ask for a better panel to talk a little bit of basketball. And here's what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to run through a few Hoosier headlines. We'll look ahead to what are we looking for that'll show us improvement in a variety of areas in Indiana basketball. And then we'll answer your questions in segment 3. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about tickets. You have a lot of options when it comes to where you get your sports tickets, and this isn't an industry that is typically known for its growth, innovation, and customer friendliness. But with millions of live event tickets and a price match guarantee, SeatGeek proves that there's a better way. They built the fastest way to find tickets so that you can stop searching for the perfect seat and instead start enjoying it. Just look at the App Store. SeatGeek has over 50,000 five-star reviews, and the reason is because they deliver a better process for buying tickets. SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web, and then they rate each deal on a scale of 1 to 10 with a color-coded system to show the value. Green dots mean good deals, red dots are overpriced. Then they display the tickets on an interactive seat map so you can see right where they are. And every purchase is fully guaranteed so you can shop for tickets with confidence. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone because it's by far the fastest and easiest way to find tickets. And I've already started looking for those random nights when I can make it down to Bloomington to look for tickets. I've already been pricing out several games using the SeatGeek app.
Can a brother get some coupons?
Yeah, Chronic, you can get some coupons. The best of all, SeatGeek will give you $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All you need to do is use our promo code. So download the SeatGeek app today and use promo code ASSEMBLY for $10 off on your purchase. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $10 off your first purchase. Okay, here are some Hoosier headlines that have happened in the past week. IU hosted Media Day on Tuesday for the players, and Archie Miller was made available to the media on Wednesday. Andre Curbelo keeps IU in his top 5, and the social media chatter recently is of Dawson Garcia possibly making an official visit on Hoosier Hysteria, and some recruiting news with other teams that were looking at Garcia that may have led to some positive vibes for Indiana. So, Galen, we'll turn to you. What headlines happened this week that really grabbed your attention?
Well, I think you mentioned it off the top. The one that really grabbed my attention was the Jerome Hunter news that he was going to be cleared. As far as the recruiting stuff is concerned, though, I mean, I think certainly the Garcia news is interesting, and I'm really fascinated by a couple of things. First of all, how Archie Miller continues to try to build this roster and the sorts of players that he seems to be going after, both in terms of, I guess, positionally speaking, and to some degree in terms of almost a disregard for worrying about what like the national rankings are. This has been something that I've seen a lot of IU fans, I think, over obsess about. The fact that the recruits he's brought in and gotten verbals from so far aren't ranked above a certain number. And yet you look at the way that many of the teams that have had success getting to the Final Four and beyond over the course of the last few years have recruited, they've followed a pattern that I don't think is dissimilar to what Archie Miller is doing right now. I mean, focusing on fit, focusing on greatest need and focusing on how things are going to mesh together maybe 2 years from now. IU's not in the same realm as Duke and Kentucky when it comes to the type of recruits that they're going to be able to pull in or that they want to pull in. And, frankly, I think even if you take the injury factor of the Romeo Langford recruitment out of it last year, I think that there needed to be a lot more team under the recruitment of Romeo Langford, even if he had been healthy, for that to be a fully effective recruit. And I think Archie Miller maybe has realized that. And I mean, granted, you're not going to not recruit Romeo Langford if the opportunity is available, but that almost looks like a blip on the radar. And what we're seeing, in terms of the news and in terms of the way that the recruiting process has gone so far, has really been, I think, a pretty logical approach to team building in the current collegiate environment.
I agree with you on that. I like those guys. We heard a lot about chemistry in a lot of the interviews. And last year, I thought there was at times there wasn't a mental toughness or that competitiveness that you would think that an Archie Miller-led team would have. And that I just thought it was personnel. And so he's recruiting a lot of those guys who want to dive on the floor, do those extra things, and then develop them in. And the question then eventually will be, how do you sprinkle in that superstar talent, as you mentioned, get that base of a team there, and then throw a superstar in?
Or do you develop the superstar? I mean,
Correct.
It's like you've got, it's like Calbert Chaney is going into the Hall of Fame, I think, back in his hometown later in November. And that was not a guy who you would have pegged as a superstar coming out of college. I mean, so much of what we get tied up in with recruiting is what are people rated right now? And there's certainly some bona fide talent. I just don't think IU's at a juncture from a program building perspective where they can plug a guy in like that and have him play at that caliber and have the team around him to support that. But they can certainly develop people. And that's what I'm really looking to see. And I think that's what Archie Miller and his staff are going to have to do if they're going to be successful over these next few years.
And we'll get to that in the next segment, things we're looking for to mark that improvement. Chronic, Hoosier headlines, what's on your mind this week about Indiana basketball?
I think I'm kind of on the same page as Galen. I think probably the biggest news this week, not just that Jerome Hunter is healthy and cleared to play, that I think on even the broader scale, that the entire team made it through the offseason, A, healthy, B, without any negative incidents taking place. I think that's usually, the best case scenario, considering where the team's been, both in the short as well as the not so short term. I think it'd be foolish to take for granted that you get through the offseason with everybody available, hopefully everybody better than where they left the season last year. So I think that's tremendously important for this team, especially considering some of the challenges they're going to face. You need all hands on deck, and you need everybody playing it, maximizing your potential here as they grow and develop within the program. I think along those same lines, though, that Galen mentioned, it's probably best case scenario as well on the recruiting front. And the fact that Archie continues to maintain the momentum that he had, I think that was the biggest risk to the program. After last season's abrupt end, was where does that leave you? Obviously, it's a critical year. You've had your top ranked recruit and decade and Romeo. How do you follow that up, especially after the disappointment? Does that turn a lot of these guys off? And I think circling back to even before Archie came on, one of the questions that I know Galen and I asked, and I know I probably espoused this in most conversations at the time, I wondered if Indiana was ever going to be in the place where they could hire another Bob Knight again, a younger coach, somebody that's had some success, but not a big name, not a high dollar ticket, but someone who, based off their acumen, based off, their skill, you see the potential there and you're willing to take that risk. And obviously in Archie, I think you got somebody who's really close to that. Along those lines, though, now that we're a couple years down the road with Arch, we're now at the point too where I guess the question then becomes, can the IU fan base take the type of program building that a coach like that's going to bring? And I think when you look at Bob Knight's success, obviously he's a brilliant mind. All that being said, though, he doesn't achieve what he does unless he recruits the right players for his particular system, for the style of basketball he wants to play, that can play together within a system like that. And I think that's every bit as important as the guy pulling the levers is who he's plugging in those spots to effectuate those plans. So I guess that's kind of where Indiana finds themselves right now. And I do agree with Galen that I think, recruiting off of need and fit rather than just chasing stars is absolutely essential, both, in Indiana's situation right now. But I think in the bigger picture, when you look at how some of the more successful programs have been able to thrive in this one and done era when they're not necessarily living and dying with the one and done type players, I think that's important. But I think it's also important that that Indiana fans at least are patient enough to recognize. Now, part of that though is the patience is going to be tested, can only be tested so long. Eventually, you're going to have to win games with these guys, and I think that's where the importance of year 3 really starts to heighten. Because now not only are we looking, what's this season look like? Well, how's this going to enable your success in season 4 and season 5 and going down the road and continuing to build? And I like where the program's at. I think again, it's probably best case scenario. Considering some of the disappointment of last season, but going back to my biggest takeaway from this week, I think a lot of that will remain contingent on this team being able to stay healthy throughout the season, because I also see a roster, at least on paper right now, with what we know and what we've seen, that is a couple, a key injury here or there away from having some really, really significant challenges, kind of like what we saw last season.
So you both brought up an interesting point about the recruiting and building. I'm going to throw you this question back. We'll go back with Chronic first. How long do you think it takes a coach? There's been some comparisons to other programs and coaches starting off and having a faster start. And I know we've all talked about, if it's a similar coach that takes over, it's easier than maybe a Tom Crean to Archie Miller. But in general, Chronic and then Galen, how do you guys feel about how long should we be patient, or how long does it take a coach to really build his program the way he wants it to be and then be continuously successful?
That's a tough one. I think the short answer is it depends. Generally speaking, I think whenever you look at a program, there's always that mark where there comes a point where the current coach, he's got all his guys in there. There's no longer holdouts from the prior regime. And I think you also have to look at exactly what did he inherit when he came into the program, and how did that facilitate that transition into whatever program was trying to be built. And obviously there were some challenges on the roster that he inherited. There were some challenges on the way that the program was kind of balanced as far as scholarships were concerned, as far as the talent that he inherited, just holding together that initial recruiting class of Al and Justin and Clifton. That was no small feat in and of itself, just keeping, Tom's guys signed up and on board. He basically had to go re-recruit them. I think with Archie and where he's trying to go here, I think realistically, you kind of look at, I don't think this is necessarily the year, but I think by next year, you should expect this program to be in a position where, this isn't, missing the tournament's not really an acceptable option. I don't want to get too full of myself, and Indiana fans love to point to that. Well, we should never miss the tournament. Well, in a perfect world, they never would. But when you look at the way the program's been managed, it's very easy to understand how it's happened repeatedly as of late, while also, in subsequent seasons having a lot of success and then finding themselves, back struggling again. So transitioning away from that type of a cycle, getting into the point, though, where you've got an identity that's been established. I mean, I'm still looking forward to seeing this team play and say that 5-minute stretch right there, that's the way Archie's offense is supposed to look. I think we got a pretty good idea what the defense is supposed to look like. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what this team is supposed to be offensively. And I think part of the challenge, at least as far as getting our arms around this offense and what Archie's really trying to do, is the pieces have kind of been so scattered at times. It really hasn't been a cohesive construction. And I think as he gets to the point where he has all of his guys in the roster and he's specifically recruiting for immediate needs in this class and subsequent classes, that I think that's part of his effectiveness as a program manager, is, putting those pieces together in a way that there is cohesion, that there is continuity from year to year, even when you lose a senior class, but more than anything, that they can continuously be effective. So I think next year, by the end of next year, we should have a pretty good idea whether or not this thing is going to float.
I agree, and I hope you're right. Galen, your thoughts on how long does it take a coach? I know there's many factors, but in your opinion?
It depends on, I think, what you inherited. It also depends on if you make mistakes in the first few years. I mean, I think you can look at someone like Chris Beard and say, he didn't make any mistakes. I mean, the first year they didn't make the tournament, and then his year 2 and year 3 have been pretty remarkable. But I mean, you can look at some very successful coaches where it took 3, 4, maybe even 5 years for it to really get going. I mean, John Beilein at Michigan, great example of that. Tony Bennett, who I think has been brought up on several occasions, a good example of that. Bruce Pearl, and everybody laughs when you say Bruce Pearl, but whatever you think the methodology is that he has gotten Auburn up and running, it took him 3 years to get to the tournament, and now they seem to be going along at a pretty good clip. So, look, I think Archie Miller made some mistakes. I think that for whatever the reason was that he decided he needed to honor the commitments of the guys that were recruited in that orphan class that Crean had brought in and then got fired before it got to play. That class hasn't quite worked out, and it's certainly not a bedrock sort of class. I mean, one member isn't even there. And then in his first recruiting class, I think there were some guys that, one of them has now transferred, and then there have been a couple of others that have been somewhat slow to start. And that happens. It's normal. I don't think there's necessarily an overt amount of criticism that needs to take place as a result of that. But if those things happen, that's going to delay the process a little bit. What ends up affecting things beyond that is their panic. And I think at a place like Indiana, there's going to be some exterior panic on the part of fans because fans don't understand why it can't happen immediately. And look, I mean, after 20 some years of a lot of false starts and a lot of accidentally downshifting from third into first or even lower than that, I can see why people would be looking at this and kind of scratching their heads or rolling their eyes and saying, all right, maybe this isn't going to work after all. Everything, like all the intangible elements, seem to be pointing, and we talked about the recruiting earlier. We talked about, I think, the fact that they've established defense as a calling card. I mean, all of those things point in the right direction. And I agree with Chronic. I think the idea that I actually think this year we're going to get a really good sense of what a replacement level Archie Miller team is going to look like, because this team kind of missing offensive stars, but certainly with guys that know how to play defense, this is going to be where we see what IU does when they don't have a particular spot on the floor they're trying to get the ball to every single time down. And, this will be, the kind of the base chassis model, I think, for IU, and probably a lot more so than the first 2 years. I just don't know if we really learned that much or could have learned that much out of the first 2 years, other than that, the things can go wrong with Archie Miller coach teams. And I don't think that's a particularly huge revelation.
Okay, coming up on the assembly call, we're going to break down what to watch for early in the season from players, coaches, the offense, and the defense. Improvement is a must. How will we know that the program direction is in a positive by what we see on the court? We'll discuss next here on the assembly call.
Can I just say for the record, it took me until the second time I went on to figure out why I was hearing myself in my own headphones on the 2.5 delay. It totally paralyzed me the first question you answered. I was like, what is going on with this audio? Apparently, I had launched a microphone check earlier and failed to shut it off, so it continued to loop back in my ears. But it was timed off with whatever feedback I'm getting from it was all sorts of fucked up. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No problem whatsoever.
It sounded fine on our end.
Maybe the audio sounded fine, but the thought process, the way in which your own voice on a 1.5 second delay can completely derail a train of thought, like it basically paralyzed my brain.
All right. So we went about 23 minutes and 42 seconds. So we got about 27 minutes left for 2 segments.
Great.
And we can get started here real quick. I'm going to check the chat room real quick, see if they're holding up in there.
Where is the chat room tonight?
It's on the YouTube channel.
YouTube.
I should probably be on there too. The one thing that goes unsaid in that segment about, what the program metrics are, and we say it depends, which is very valid. It also, the one unique element at Indiana, it kind of also depends a little bit on football. Because when you have your two revenue generating sports continue to struggle and are just on the cusp but can't quite get over the hump, it kind of heightens the degree of difficulty for the opposite coach the subsequent season. And I think that it becomes more problematic for Archie if football continues to underachieve.
Well, then he's got some issues.
Yeah. Well, the administration has issues, which tend to be everybody else's issues.
Well, we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise us this weekend. That would be interesting.
That would be the high point of the last 5 years of my IU fandom.
There needs to be one of those breakout wins. And it needs to be a team that's not good and then has a 3-9 year like Michigan State a couple years ago. I mean, we just really need to beat someone, and I don't see it happening. But
yeah. If they, as I'm saying, if they lose this game, beat Rutgers, and then they go into that Maryland game, and if they win that Maryland game, they got 5 wins, and they've got 5 chances at that point to pick up the 6th win. And I mean, they're going to be probably 2 touchdown favorite against Northwestern. It's a much better scenario. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yep.
No, I'm for it, but I do agree. They need one of those wins just to get the wind in their sails and get downhill on the season and just see how weird we can get.
Rob asked in chat who's going to advance further, women's basketball or soccer. I still think soccer's a good bet. It's a young team. They got a lot of talent. They're still learning. Not that women's basketball isn't good. It's just they've still got a pretty big mountain to climb talent-wise compared to like that next tier of women's basketball teams. So I think they're both going to be pretty good by tournament time, though.
No, and I think you have to look at this soccer season completely different. Like last year, you were really, really veteran-driven.
This is like 3 years ago.
Where the
team that couldn't score.
Yeah. No, when you look at a team right now, though, that the talent is absolutely there. They got to figure out how to play with each other. They got to figure out, how to avoid some of those defensive breakdowns they've had.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely there. I don't care about losses. I don't care about rankings. I care about progression because their ceiling is so ridiculously high. A team like last year, they were pretty much playing up to their ceiling for most of the entire season. And you're just hoping to maintain that level. This team's got nothing but growth ahead of them. Just stay on the arc.
You guys are a little more positive than I am.
I trust. In Yeagley we trust. I think he'll figure out a way to put it together. So
yeah, I was referring back to your football comments. I didn't clarify that. Soccer is. I love watching soccer, and I got season tickets. Haven't been down yet. But
let me clarify my football position. I absolutely believe this team can shit the bed spectacularly.
Okay.
I was going to say, let me clarify my football position. In Yeagley, we trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was caught up in getting the second segment ready, and I forgot you went to soccer. You were talking football and then went to soccer, and I tell you, I love doing this, fellas. I'd much rather be in your position than my position. I'm sweating. I am.
I've been there, man. You're doing a great job. You're piloting the plane expertly.
So, well, it is. I'm piloting it. If it's excellent or poorly, there's no choice, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go. I'm gonna pause for about 10 seconds and get ready to play some music intro, and we'll go right into second. Do you guys want to talk? You want to talk offense, defense, personnel, coaching first? Any preference? On what I'm just looking for this. Like I'm looking.
I think personnel is most important, and followed by offense. I don't know.
I was going to say personnel, maybe 1A offense, 1B, or interchange them. They're one.
What signs? I'll just ask. What signs are you looking for at Hoosier Hysteria, which you don't see a lot, but the early practice, early games that'll lead us to understand, that the personnel is headed in the right direction, or this team can achieve some things, and then we'll go into how are you going to tell the offense that is clicking the way Indiana offense should be. I'm interested in that off the ball movement, what that's going to look like. So we'll just go from there and just wing it. I think we all do a pretty good job of just saying what we want. So, all right, here we go in about 10 seconds.
What's going on? It's Christian Wofford. What's the only thing better than an epic buzzer beater? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join my guys, Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the assembly call after every IU game. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, Christian, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcast or watch those replays and see all the between the segment banner, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni, here with this week's special guest hosts, Chronic Hoosier and Galen Clavio, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we're looking for on the court with this Indiana basketball program at Hoosier Hysteria and in the early season games in November. How are we going to see that improvement that Indiana fans are longing for? And Galen, we'll start with you on personnel. What kind of signs are you looking for with the personnel that we have, the 11-man roster, that'll tell you that this program is on the upswing?
I think a lot of it's going to come down to how they decide to roll out their basically top 7 or top 8 rotation. When I look at the roster right now, it's going to be interesting because so much of it hinges on a couple of things. One is obviously Jerome Hunter's health, and he's cleared for basketball activity, and that's great. What does that mean? How does that translate to the floor? If you look at Bart Torvik's website, which I highly recommend for all basketball fans, it's like Ken Pom on like the best steroids possible. You can see he's got Jerome Hunter projected at about 5 points a game. I think he could probably almost double that. I think he's got the shooting and scoring ability, and he's got the versatility, and that's something that we've heard talked about in media day. If they're moving him around and they're getting him out there and he's able to play 20 to 25 minutes a game, if not more than that, I think that's a really good sign for IU. I think him and Al Durham are going to be plugging several different holes. When IU wants to go big, and we've read about that, Zach Osterman had a piece in the Indy Star. That's going to be important. And then we can roll a 6'4" or a 6'6" guy out there at the 2, and you've got Joey Brunk and you've got Justin Smith, and maybe you got Trace Jackson Davis or Deron Davis out there. That's a good look against certain teams. And then if they can roll back and go a little bit smaller, and they can roll Hunter over to the 3 and have Finney and Green in the backcourt, there's a lot of potential versatility. So I'm looking at that, and I think you're going to have a regular rotation at the 5 between Brunk, Jackson Davis, and Davis. Like all 3 of those guys are going to have to perform. And I think the best case statistical scenarios for IU, particularly offensively, are kind of relying on all of them to be able to perform. The ability of Deron Davis to play a respectable number of minutes on a night in, night out basis is going to be huge. Can he get through an entire season without injury? Can his stamina last for the entire 4 years? He's had a lot of tough injury issues, and I think he's just got a body that's kind of at war with itself. And this is probably, I don't know how many more effective years of basketball he's got just because of all the injuries that he's had. But if we can get one more year where he plays at a really good level, I think that's a huge potential positive for IU. And I think the last piece for me, how much do you get out of the 2 guys I haven't mentioned so far, Armand Franklin and Demezy Anderson? Demezy Anderson, I think, had a very disappointing year last year. He would certainly probably say that as much as anybody. It was a struggle for him to find time on the court and to stay on the court. He only played in 21 games. His shooting from outside was not very good. And Armand Franklin, I think, has a possibility of coming in and contributing. It's just a matter of what does that look like for this IU team. So I kind of talked about everybody there, but those are the things I think that we got to look at the most.
I think it will be interesting, the rotation at the 5. Who starts and who comes off the bench, and are there matchup situations at the 5? I do think that personnel decision is going to be very interesting to watch. Chronic, your thoughts on personnel. What are you looking for? What would you like to see? And that's going to tell you, hey, we're headed as Indiana fans in the right direction personnel wise.
I think the biggest thing right off the bat is I'm looking to see leadership. One of the biggest obstacles that this roster faces is, we can talk about scoring and what a huge void in the offense that Langford and Morgan created with their departure. That was 45% They average 32 points a game combined. That's 45% of IU's average on any given night. But I think beyond that, even more important than that right now, because I think scoring, if the offense is being run effectively, can be spread around. It's not like everybody's got to jump their average, 10 points per game in order to make up for that. If your rotation players each average, say, 3 points higher than where they had previously, I think you've plugged that gap nicely. But more than anything, I want to see who is willing to lead this team. And I'm not just talking about grabbing guys by the jersey and getting in their face when they screw up. Who's willing to lead this team by example? Who's willing to be the guy that gets the stops when they need him? Who's going to be the guy that's getting on the floor for the loose balls? Who's going to be the guy that this team looks to that sets the tone? I think this is a roster that's screaming for leadership. They need to see some alphas out there. And when you just look at, from a class perspective, you've got 2 seniors, and Deron Davis and Devontae, and those guys can certainly they can exert their will on the game, but it's not always necessarily in a positive manner. And how they kind of manage that new role that they found themselves in, I think they can both be really, really special players for this team. But understanding that role, playing within that role, and also at the same time bringing guys up as you elevate yourself, bringing your teammates up with you, I think is going to be absolutely imperative. And then I guess kind of on the micro, there's a whole lot of questions about how this team is going to score the bucket. One thing statistically I'm looking at really, really closely is, can we get above 65% from the free throw line? And for the life of me, I don't understand.
Is that allowed?
I don't know. And I'm still trying to figure out. I've got some theories what's vexed this team.
New math.
They've pretty consistently been at 65% and some change underneath Archie. Now, what was important was last year they brought the opponents down even lower than that. My running hypothesis is Archie's style of defense, the pack line, the pace at which he likes to play his offense, is just sapping these guys' legs. If that's true, maybe with a little bit more time, experience in the system, with conditioning that kind of accounts for that, maybe these shooters will have their legs underneath them. I think part of it's schematic, and I think a big part of it's personnel as well. But when you look at the baseline metrics, is can this team shoot the ball better? There's one controlled shot in the entire game, and that's from the charity stripe. And, even if you're missing a clear cut, this is your number one shooter on this roster, there's no reason that giving the issues that free throw shootings cause this team, that this isn't something that can be correctable. And this isn't something that we can see some pretty marked, quantifiable statistical improvement in.
So, Chronic, you bring up a great point. As a coach myself, you try to coach leadership and bring leadership out of people. Let me ask both of you. I'll start with you, Chronic. Who would you think is the best vocal leader, could potentially be the best vocal leader? And who would be that person who leads by example, that's just really tough in the drills and diving on the floor and leading by example? And in our high school program, you would like that to be upperclassmen, but sometimes your upperclassmen aren't necessarily those dudes. And when you look at this roster, so who's that vocal leader that you think is going to shine this year? And who's that person that with their play leads the Indiana Hoosiers?
I'm looking at Finney. I mean, that's your point guard. That's your floor leader. That's the one guy who really impressed upon me. He's got a bulldog mentality. I mean, the way that he gets in guys' faces defensively, the way that he can attack off the dribble, at least when he was healthy, the explosiveness that he has, but just his tenacity. He's something to handle, and he's as tough of a player as I think we've seen under Archie so far. I think that's your guy. I think the position he plays makes him a natural fit for it. He seemed like, at least through some of those healthy portions last year, a guy that really didn't have a problem exerting himself on the floor. And, it was more of a quiet leadership as a freshman, as you would expect. But just his willingness to get in there and get his nose dirty, I think that's the guy. And, obviously you look at the upperclassmen, I think Joey Brunk brings a tremendous asset, just having been through multiple seasons now up at Butler, where he's got to experience pretty much everything that a senior would at this point, as far as just the rigors of college Division I basketball, major conference basketball at that. And, honestly, I think he's one of those guys that's probably going to be a star in the post. So whenever you've got a guy that, not only can he kind of fill in some of those spaces in the locker room, but can go out there and give the meaningful minutes, can get the stops, can get the buckets that your team needs. Because I think that's probably what the third biggest thing I'm looking for is who's the fail-safe option. When the offense is broke down and the shot clock's expiring, they had a tremendous dump down guy in Juwan Morgan. He was such a creative scorer under the basket that he saved them a lot of issues when the offense wasn't necessarily clicking. They don't have that this year. So who is the guy that when the shot clock's going down that you try to dump the ball down to and hope for the best? I think Joey could be that guy for this team.
Galen, talking about Joey Brunk, we've heard a lot of leadership, a lot of talk in the locker room and on the court from Joey Brunk. How easy or difficult is it for a guy to be a transfer and come into a program and be a leader? And is that going to be effective?
I don't think it's easy, and I don't think it's going to be effective. I think I guess when I think about this team and how it's going to set up, as much as I would like to agree with Chronic that the answer to this question is Rob Finney, I think in reality, the answer to this question, probably both questions, is Devontae Green, for better or for worse, in as much as Green is going to be the leading scorer on this team, almost certain. I'd say there's probably like a 4 in 5 chance that that's the case. He is a 4-year senior. He's a guy that has, obviously had some troubles in terms of how he's meshed with the team at times, and yet he might be the most talented natural scorer on the team. And I think you look down the rest of the roster and, Al Durham, nice guy, but seems like a role player. Justin Smith, I just don't think he's got it in his personality to assert himself in that way. Jerron Davis, same thing. Trace Jackson Davis is a freshman. Jerome Hunter is coming off a major injury, and I think is still trying to find himself on the collegiate level. And Finney is a guy who, while I certainly liked his play, and I think he's definitely a play-by-example sort of guy, there's an alpha dog mentality that has to affect somebody in the backcourt. And I have a hard time seeing a 4-year senior starter ceding that to a sophomore point guard. It doesn't seem to jive with me. I mean, even during media day, we're hearing about Devontae Green handling the ball and also coming off of screens and like doing all of these things. To me, if you're going to be the focal point like that, you're also going to be the leader. And I don't know what that looks like for this IU team. I think that last year, how much people want to admit it or not, but there seemed to be a battle for the controls of the airplane, and it was like a 3-way battle, and one of the people battling wasn't a player. Now maybe that's been cleared up and maybe everybody's pointing in the right direction, but we still have to actually see it in action and see it work for me to get really comfortable with it.
Hence a lot of the talk of chemistry and toughness and all of those things in the recruiting and in the media day. And we always say too, your best player better be your hardest worker and best leader. And that goes to the Devontae Green conversation there, that if you're going to be the dude who's getting 15 points, you ought to better be leading. And that could go the other way too, as we've seen Devontae have good Devontae and bad Devontae. Let's transition here to offense. What kind of things are we looking for that'll say, you know what, this offense looks a little bit better than what we've seen in the past? Galen, what would you like? What would you like to see, or what are you looking for, or both?
Well, I mean, I will fall in line with Chronic a little bit and say I'd love to see some free throw shooting. I mean, that was really, you can afford, I think, to not shoot the ball, great from the 3-point line. If you're shooting the ball well from 2-point, which they did last year, they shot 53% from 2, and you're shooting the ball at the median level or better from the free throw line. I mean, last year it wasn't just that they shot 65% from the free throw line, it was that was 328th in the country. And that just can't be. So, I have to think the 3-point shooting is going to get better. Now, granted, we said that last year, and, we were coming off of a historic worst 3-point shooting performance in 2018, and it actually somehow managed to get like a full percentage point worse in 2019. So there has to be maybe it's just a bounce back somewhat close to the mean. But I really think that's what it comes down to, because if you look at IU from an offensive efficiency perspective, they actually were slightly better last season than they were the season before. And much of that came down to shooting the ball from 2 a little bit better, and also turning the ball over slightly less. So I guess that would be the other category. They dropped their turnover percentage a smidge. They're turning it over under 18% of the time. If they can drop that down to like 15% of the time, then suddenly they're not wasting as many possessions. They're being more efficient. If they can get that offensive efficiency cranked up to where it's in the 50s, as far as the national ranking is concerned, I think that's where this team is in serious contention to win 20, 21, 22 games.
So, Chronic, I heard as an old man myself, I heard that there might be a little more of an old man game being played with the size that Indiana and that kind of makes this old man smile a little bit. Do you think that the old man game, a little more motion offense, will please Indiana fans and, as Galen said, make the offense a little more efficient? And then add what are you looking for to see in this year's offense?
There's the nostalgic piece of me that absolutely loves the concept. There's the analytical piece of me that says that's exactly the opposite direction that the game's gone. The lowest percentage shot, trying to dump it down into the post every trip down the floor. Figuring out how they balance that. I think, if you want to say pitch this old man game concept, but tell me that we're going to have all sorts of pick and roll, pick and pop action that's going to come off of it, that we're going to be able to utilize the high post as a kind of as an intersection for cutters, for screening, to get some guys some better looks than what they're going to be able to get off the dribble without assistance. Then yeah, I guess I'm here for it. But part of that too is contingent on can we shoot the 3 ball at a non-historically bad rate? Can we continue to get high quality inside looks, or at least 2-point looks, where they've been most effective over the Archie tenure? I guess we'll see. The one thing I think I like most about this setup, at least on paper, is I think it does give Archie a lot of matchup versatility. I think the personnel he has is going to give them a lot of different looks, even kind of within the same construct, whether it be, a 3-guard set. I'm really, really intrigued to see what Jerome Hunter brings to the offense. I think having that guy that can work the baseline, that can stretch the defenses, that can play above the rim is absolutely going to be an integral part. And I think that was one of the big things this team was missing last year, to be totally honest with you, was kind of that slasher who could keep defenses honest, who could give you another passing option. It just opens up a whole lot more things when you're trying to play the inside out type of ball that Archie Shoney wants to do with this team. I don't know. We'll see where I guess I need to see it really in action. I need to see it in practice. I need to see, who fills what roles when we give different looks. I think the one thing I would caution all of the speculation on is oftentimes it's probably going to have to involve some defensive assessment as well. I mean, these guys are going to have to prove that they're not a liability when we go back onto the other end of the floor, because I think that's going to be absolutely an imperative for this team. Is yes, we need to become a lot better at scoring the basketball, but you cannot sacrifice your defensive effectiveness in order to achieve it. And I think you look over in Memorial at the football team right now, and it's okay to have a less than elite offense, but your defense can't regress at the same time that the offense is trying to figure itself out. So I guess we'll see.
I think, to your point, it's a combination of personnel and offense. Is it small lineup, big lineup? Who's going to play the 3? Is Hunter going to play the 3? Does Justin play any 3, which kind of gives me a little bit of pause? And are you going to play a couple bigs together? I think that's going to affect the offense. I do like the fact that there's going to be some movement off the ball. Galen?
Yeah, just something that I think is interesting. A not half bad comp for IU's offense last year was actually Duke. And if you look at Duke and what they did last year, they shot the 3 very poorly. In fact, percentage-wise, they shot worse than Indiana did. And free throw-wise, they weren't much better. They shot like 2 or 3 percentage points better. They shot the ball from 2 very well. But what Duke did last year that made them so effective offensively was that they rebounded the ball on the offensive boards. And that's something that IU did fairly well in Archie Miller's first year, and then they basically abandoned last year. So it'll be interesting with 3 functional big men plus Justin Smith, who can certainly rebound. Does IU crash the offensive boards more versus what they did last year, where they looked like they were backing off and focusing almost entirely on transition defense. I think particularly if you're not hitting threes, crashing the boards like that can generate additional offensive possessions, can extend offensive possessions. And that frankly can be the difference in terms of, we only win 18 or 19 versus you win 21 or 22.
I think I can't agree with both of you more than saying it. Looking at one aspect, you need to look at defense as well, because it's really going to depend on who can guard, and especially some of those bigs out on the perimeter. I think it is really important to be able to do that on the other end and then design some offense. So we're going to move forward now to our third segment, and coming up in our third segment, we'll answer your questions, including one from our main host, Jared. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. Okay, man, I could talk to you guys for another hour. We're at 44:38. So we have basically less than 5 minutes for this question period. And Jared wanted us to get into a tailgate discussion. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I'm always up for that. You know that.
We could talk about good tailgates. He wanted us to have a tailgate battle. I can't hang with your cooking acumen, Galen.
I don't know about that.
I do have a bar for the tailgate, though, and a pub table. I think that's unique. So
I generally have 1.75 liters of Jameson.
Well, there's the winning comment right there.
That's just throw the royal flush down, Chronic.
Down.
I mean, that's, you all know.
Game over. That's all you need, right?
We need like an MTV Cribs, but for the tailgate. Like just get the full video spread going. Maybe we should invite the chat mob as taste testers.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've had a few of the chat mobs stop out, and it's starting to. We have some regulars now. Joel Ritchie and Lee Butler stopped by with his beautiful wife Helen, and that's nice to see. And we're talking a little basketball during the football tailgate, but I guess that's the way it is at Indiana.
That's every IU tailgate.
Absolutely, right. So, and the only other one that I thought was, and I don't know that 5 minutes does it, and so maybe I want to save this for Jared and the gang the next time. Jay Horry asked about Athletic came out with the top 25 college coaches. They did a draft, and Archie wasn't there, and there were a few people on there that I think he asked which of the coaches that were picked would you rank behind Archie in your personal rankings, and I had my issues listed there in that room, but I don't think the 5 minutes is enough.
Yeah. No, truthfully, I never read it. I've kind of sworn off a list here unless I just am absolutely bored out of my skull.
Yeah. All right. So let's just do a little tailgate discussion, and I'll give everyone I will start with mine, and then Galen, you can talk about yours, and we'll just set up Chronic for the mic drop at the end. And then if I'm timing this right, you might hear, if you hear this.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
I have to go into the outro immediately. So
no worries.
I'm copying.
It's kind of crazy to do one of these without the soundboard constantly chiming in, because Jared is like a fucking ninja with that thing. Just like throwing stars, just dicing me up with my own words all the time. Totally keeps me off balance.
Oh, that's hilarious. I got to find the outro here before. I might be making it up here, fellas. There. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So just be a quick tailgate discussion for about 5 minutes, and then we'll end it. All right. We'll start in 10 seconds. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni.
And I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
So welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and I interrupt a great player, Jordan Hulls. So we'll just keep that in here. I'm back with Chronic Hoosier and Galen Clavio. I knew there was going to be a slip up at some point with this soundboard, but remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup even during the off season. And after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. It's time now for our mailbag. All questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, assemblycall.com/community. And we are running a little short of time, so we're going to go to our host, Jared Morris. Question I wanted to answer all of us, and that was about who has the best tailgate between the three of us. And I think that's difficult because I think all three of us have unique setups for our tailgate situation. And so I'm proud of the bar that we have and the pub tables, and I'm proud of the pub table and just the signs I have. So I think that's unique, and I think that's pretty good. But Chronic or Galen, what do you do well?
We just try to set it up, and it's almost like a picnic in tailgate form. We got a nice grassy area. We try to get the grill going early. We take advantage of the breakfast side of the tailgate because, unfortunately, IU football games, they've decided they all have to start at noon, which I think is a little bit unfortunate. And then, we've got great people that stop by, as I know you do with yours as well. But it's, look, I think what we just try to do is warm the spirit as much as possible for people that are planning on going into Memorial Stadium on a weekly basis.
And Chronic, what makes your tailgate so special?
I think I consider myself an Indiana tailgate traditionalist. My tailgates usually consist of meat and probably some chips and just a bunch of liquor. There's always going to be at least a handle of Jameson. I've got 2 milk crates, the old plastic cubes that I keep just with bottles for tailgates. The Jameson will rotate out just because of the constant replenishment. But I have my own tailgating bar that is always crated and ready for rapid deployment. So that's kind of what we do best. We drink a lot of liquor and beer. I try to bring a lot of beer as well because something's got to wash the chips and the meat down when you're not doing shots. No, I will say though, seriously, no matter how you choose to tailgate, this is the apex of Indiana tailgate season right now. We are living in the golden times of the football calendar. Humidity is down, temperatures are cool in the morning, sun still warms in the afternoon. Pretty much the idyllic time on 17th Street to be out there. No matter how you do it, who you're doing it with, it's really this period right now on the schedule that I think when everybody looks back and reflect upon your IU football, your tailgating memories, it's these days right now, this part of the schedule that we think about. So no matter how you do it big, because these are the days, friends.
I think everyone should stop by all of our tailgates. We have about 40 seconds. So real quick question. What one Bloomington restaurant no longer around do you miss the most? And we got about 30 seconds. Chronic, real quick.
McCree's.
And Galen, the restaurant that is not around that you miss the most?
Also McCree's.
OG McCree's for the record.
Yeah, the one over by Kroger. Yeah, absolutely. Honorable mention to Grisanti's, however.
And real quick shout out, happy that Yogi's is coming back. And do we have a date real quick?
I heard October, and I'm going to reserve my enthusiasm until I actually experience it. I think the space could be really good. It's kind of how they deploy it and what the menu looks like, and more than anything, too, what the crowd looks like. Because that was always like my.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
Sorry to cut you off, Chronic, but we have to go. And well, that'll do it for this week on the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you hear on this show, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right. Sorry, I threw those last two in there.
No worries. We could do a whole podcast on that one. We did.
I know.
We're going to. That is we got it in the works. I'm talking with IU Artifacts about it right now. So.
I definitely have to be part of this pod.
Oh no, don't worry.
So I did.
Go ahead, Coach.
I made two mistakes. I never put us in gallery view where all three of us were on the screen at the same time. It was always one person, and I know Jared likes to do that. And then I interrupted Jordan Halls. I mean, that's sacrilegious right there. I had no idea he was on that clip. I just saw segment 3 intro, and I did not listen to that one ahead of time.
Lightning's going to strike you down now. It's sad.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm a
just
unplug
the mixer first, okay?
Yeah. No, I'm a perfectionist. I heard him come on there. I was like, oh man, I thought I timed it just right with the words and the song. And
if you're not aware, whenever I'm a part of it, perfection is completely off the table at this point, technically at least. That's a given. Well,
Chronic, it's an honor to get to talk with you. I've appreciated your work from afar, and now I appreciate it here on the show.
Hey man, I thank you very much. And I appreciate everything you guys have done. I think it's amazing what this has grown into with the assembly call on the, just all of it. I mean, I still remember going out to my truck shaking with a heart rate of about 140 after the Watt Shot game and calling in for the first time, and then kind of stepping back and looking at it and be like, we just did that. And this is where we are, and to see where it's come from. It's pretty darn cool. And the fact that people still like to join in, makes it all the better. And from a personal standpoint, there's just a lot of awesome people involved in it that I never would have met in real life but for these platforms. So
yeah, it's the last 4 or 5 years since I've started following Assembly Call. Jared's done just tremendous stuff for me and the interns, and getting to meet people like you through this is just, it's helped as an educator sometimes get through the frustrating times of where education has gone on my end. So I appreciate you guys tremendously.
Hey, speaking of education, Galen, who's the stars this year? Who's the one that on your side with the kids that we need to be watching?
Sam Niederman, I think, is definitely the leader in the clubhouse there.
He's a pro.
And we got Mary Kate Hamilton, who's doing a little bit of sideline now. We're having an interesting. We're doing a lot of men's basketball games. Hoosier Hysteria next weekend, and then we've got Gannon, and then we've got at least 2 regular season games, if not more than that. And we got some pretty talented kids that are going to be doing those broadcasts. So keep an eye out.
I tell you, Galen, they do a great job.
Thanks.
Just a great job.
Well, I pass that along to them. It means a lot. I know when it's the funny thing when you're a student broadcaster or a student writer, you never think anybody's looking at your stuff or listening to your stuff. And like, these kids are in an interesting spot because this is like the first era where you know that people are, and I think they certainly handle the pressure a lot more and a lot better than I would have at that same age. I remember the first time someone called into my WIUS show, I freaked out. Like it was hard to handle. So they're very, very good.
No, it used to be that was only for prank calls.
Right. Yes.
The WIS hotline was only for like your roommates or some of your buddies that would call in and prank. I made a lot of those phone calls in my day. I remember it.
Oh yeah.
So thoughts leading up, real quick. We just keep this going for a little bit. Whenever you guys need to leave. I need to get the video or audio cut and set to Jared. But are we going to be happy at the end of the year, real quick?
I'll say this. A lot of it depends on what their record is in the non-conference. There is a legitimate chance they're going to go 11-0 in the non-conference. Like I think that they could legitimately win every single game. And if you do that, you can go 9-11 in the conference season and still make the tournament, I think, relatively easily. If they lose one, then, getting to 10-10, I really think the Big Ten is going to be weird because so much of the projections rely on Penn State being really good, Rutgers being really good, and Iowa being like okay, and then Illinois being like a top 15 team. Like, I don't know if any of those predictions are going to be correct. And so I think if Indiana can play really good defense and they can find some scoring, there's no reason they can't, be somewhere between 9 and 11 wins. And I think that as long as there's no catastrophes in the non-conference, that'll get them in the tournament.
Yeah, I think 20 is the magic number from a bracketology perspective. Depending on what 20, though, you got to get some good wins in there. But yeah, they can't one loss maybe 2 in the non-conference, but nothing more than that. Yeah, they got to make hay in the non-conference. I agree.
No, it's I understand a lot of the fans' perspective that you want to play. You want those marquee matchups. If ever there were a season for one that's a little less than stellar, I think this is absolutely it for these guys. If nothing else, too early on, just so that you can kind of toy with the rotation a little bit and figure out situationally who do you want and what spots when, who maybe is the one guy that might not be there in November, December, but come February and March, you could see him being more impactful, a bigger contributor. But God, just managing the load on these guys. Cause again, I still continue to think, you're a Devontae or a Rob injury away from the wheels falling off on this team. And, at least getting through the non-conference as unscathed as you can, not just record-wise, but health-wise, because I need to better articulate. I need to write this down. I still continue to absolutely loathe the Big Ten games before the first semester is done. I cannot stand it with all of my existence. But there's just something about that getting past New Year's with a healthy roster that's close to 100%, I think is always important, but it just puts such a premium on that this year because who knows what the conference is going to shake out to be. I'm still kind of offended by some of the preseason rankings, but I can totally understand where they're coming from as well. At the same time though, it's going to be awful tough to be a top 5 team in this league this year with what I think IU is going to be bringing to the table. But at the end of the day, how much of a difference is between 4 and 10? Anybody's guess.
I was going to say we didn't put this on the show because we just did offense and personnel, and I'm one of the biggest Archie Miller fans around, but he can't have another Minnesota episode where he rights the ship after a big blowout. I think he's got to be a little tougher and demand some more. And some of that's personnel based, I think. But I think maybe he tried from afar. I'm not there to be too much of a player's coach, maybe. And smooth the difference personalities and everything. And then after Minnesota, he had whatever happened. And they played really well after that. And I think we just got to be more consistent on that level from the coaching standpoint.
I actually think it's more the opposite. I think,
really,
from the standpoint that everything I've heard, it's more along the lines of, well, they Archie does not particularly believe in this idea that he should be making sure guys are playing hard. That's just something that should be expected at this level. And that I think was a real problem
right
up to that Minnesota game. And I think that what to some degree righted the ship at the very tail end was that, they got back to those sorts of fundamentals, which they shouldn't have needed to. That should have been hardwired into the team. And I think it was to a certain degree. I think they were playing that way early on in the season. I think you saw that with some the Northwestern win in the non-conference or in the early conference and stuff like that. But
they didn't handle adversity. They didn't handle adversity very well. They kind of pouted when they got punched.
And there were as Jay has pointed out in a lot of our chats, there were a lot of injuries and there were a lot of things that were difficult. But I just think it was there wasn't a lot of player leadership that was clear on the team last year. And that probably was unavoidable given the roster composition and the way that everything fit together. And that's not an indictment of any one player. It's more just kind of how things just played out. And so, look, I think this year's team doesn't have much of a margin for error. And that's ultimately going to be the big question is, can the whole be greater than the sum of the parts? Because last year it was the opposite. And if they're going to claw into the tournament as an 8 or a 9 seed or something like that, then that's going to be what has to happen. But I would remind everybody that the year that Indiana beat Kentucky with the watch shot game and made it to the Sweet 16 was a year where the team came into the season and everybody was projecting an NIT bid. Because everybody's like, oh, this team's at least a year away from being able to compete and all of that. That's gotten lost in the sands of time. And I think you find out the most about coaches and programs in years where the expectations are low to some degree.
It's also a team that had 2 lottery players on it.
Which no one knew at the time. Like, I mean, Victor Oladipo was coming off of a season where
no, Victor was totally out of the blue, but I think Cody was.
Well, no, sure.